Hey y'all! Well, today we're going to jump over to doing a little populating of this board. I know we've been doing fabrication work to the chassis, and sometimes it's nice to get a little break and go work on another part of the project so you don't get burnt out. So, like I said, today we're going to populate up the main board for the preamp. And there's a order that I like to solder the parts on the board. I start with things like the tube socket. These are ceramic. Heat really doesn't affect them. The next thing I do is I populate all the resistors. And then last I put in the capacitors because they are the more heat sensitive of the components. So one thing you need to be careful of, I've seen people do this online, is the tube sockets do not go on this side. They go in from this side. And a guy wanted to populate the board on he wanted to put all the passive components on the bottom side, which you can do because they're just two leads. And so instead of putting them on this side of the board, you could put them on this side of the board and then have this mounted up real close to have it real close to the top of the chassis, and then have the tubes all sticking out. You could fabricate it like that if you wanted to have like the tubes sticking up so you could see them glowing. I think it's better to have them mounted down low in these standoffs like this, so that just the tips of the tubes are sticking up, so the tubes are shielded from interference by the chassis. So that's the way we're going to do this one again. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to put all three tube sockets in the board, and you just push them down as far as they'll go. And we have three of them. We have three dual triodes is the way this preamp is set up. So you might have to adjust the pins a little bit to get them to all go in. So we'll fight with that just a little bit, but shouldn't be too difficult to get them. Got one more. That one right there is not cooperating. And once we get all these sitting on the board, we'll flip the board over and solder all these pins up. So we get the soldering iron nice and warmed up, where, as you can see, the solder almost instantly melts on it. And we'll come in here and put the tip up against the board first. Feed a little solder in, and go ahead and put a pretty good bit of little solder in there. You want it to go all the way through. And if you're doing it right, when you turn it over, you should see the solder on this side of the board too. So let me see if I can zoom in here where you can see that. See how the solder is coming through on this side of the board too? That's what you want to see. So, and we kind of push this down, then we know the sockets are up against the board as tight as they should be. And we just go around. And sometimes it helps to touch, like see it's getting this little brown looking stuff on there. Kind of brush it off on the little gold pad. And sometimes you need to touch the solder to the tip just to get a little bit of flux flowing, because it is a rosin core solder. So the flux is in the center of the solder, and you have to melt it out into the joint so that the solder will flow into both pieces of metal, the pin and the board. And you just work your way around. And I know my other builds, I went ahead and just said, okay, I'm going to go populate this. But several of the viewers asked me to, can you please show us soldering every connection? So, don't mind doing that. I'm just going to leave the camera running and just chat a little bit while I'm doing this. I actually have done a lot more of this type of soldering. I worked in the car repair industry, and we did a lot of repairs to automotive computer boards. So I'm really used to soldering this kind of stuff together. And once I get these soldered up, I'm going to have to take a little break here and feed Dolly. She came over and is whimpering for dinner. One day I may try wiring up one of these preamps as a point-to-point. But these circuit boards that I got off eBay from China, they do seem to make assembling this so much easier. And given that we're running DC on the heaters to these tubes, you really don't have the concern about having to twist the heater wires to keep the hum from getting into the circuit. I'm not really sure how well using a circuit board and an amplifier that has AC heaters would work. The other thing people have been asking me to potentially do in the future is a straight up just a preamp without the RIAA equalization. That's more for if you have a little lower output source driving a power amp that needs a little stronger input signal, or possibly even like on my 300B amp, we might be able to get some more drive out of it, driving it with a nice preamp. And they've asked to do a direct heated triode preamp, which that would be an interesting project. So that may be one of our future builds. Now, this is the first time I've used this little Hakko, I don't know how you really pronounce it, Hakko. It's the first time I've used this soldering iron. It's really nice. I like it. So, there we have our 3 tube sockets soldered onto the board. The next thing we have is we have a couple of, then I want to come up here and get my flush cutters. There's not much sticking out. I just think it looks nicer to come in and just trim off anything that's sticking up. even though there's no way it would come close to touching anything. I think it just makes a nicer looking finished board to come in and cut off any of the excess pin that's sticking out. It's only a couple of millimeters, but we'll go around and trim all these off. Like that. Okay. The next thing we've got is a couple of these 100 ohm, 3 watt resistors. And this is feeding the plate of the output tube. And these are a couple of really nice resistors that I have that are 100 ohm, 5 watt that I'm going to use here. Doesn't hurt to have a larger resistor than is, on the thing. When you have a resistor like this that is basically a power resistor, you don't want to jam it like right up against the board like that. You want to stand it up a little bit. So we're going to stand it up, bend the leads over, and then I'm going to go ahead and put both of these in. And obviously, this isn't real critical when you have a really small signal resistor, but it never hurts anything to stand the resistor up off the board just a little bit so that there's air all the way around the resistor, and you don't have to worry about the resistor cooking the circuit board. So we'll set those up like that. We'll come in here, tag these two guys down. And honestly, soldering is just practice. And then you kind of figure out, right there I was flowing a little solder onto the iron tip. So I feel like sometimes you got to get, the heat needs to transfer through the solder to the joint to really get the solder flowing nice. And there's our 100 ohm resistors. And then we'll trim those leads off. The other thing that I always do, especially on you see how these are standing up like that? That'll help protect them, because we know the chassis is going to sit way up here. So we don't have to have them super flush. So having them stand up a little bit like that, and we're going to do that with all the power resistors. It just helps keep the heat away from the circuit board, because at the end of the day, that's what ends up killing circuit boards. I'm actually going to bend these over just a little bit, because here's where the DC for the heaters connect up on this board, is on these two leads right here that comes over from my power supply. So anyway, we got those two in. The next thing we have is we need to find these. There's 68K 3 watts. So they're going to be pretty big resistors. And I usually leave them in the bags they come in from Mauser. It makes it a whole lot easier. Like here's my 2K. These are my 20K. And these are my 200K. Here they are. So here are 68K 3 watt resistors. They go right next to these 100Ks, or 100 ohm. And then we turn our meter on. And I'll let you watch as I check these. And I have a clip on one lead, so it can hold it by itself like that, and then hold the other end down there, and there's 67.7K. Damn close. And these are only 5%. 67.6, 67.7. They're identical. So for most of these power positions, I just got, and like I just got 5% for the ones for the RIAA network. I bought 1% resistors because I want to make sure they're as close to the design values as possible. So when I'm going to solder a resistor like this on, I hold it up and I look about, try to get the bend equal on both sides. Bend that over, and bend that over. It just looks nicer if they're fairly similar. And then put this guy through. And again, I want to stand this guy up off the proud of the board so that we don't have a problem with the resistor heating up the circuit board. Bend this one over. And like I said in an earlier video, in this version, we're not using the parts that came with the board on the actual preamp board. I am going to use some of the resistors and parts that it came with on the power supply board. I don't feel like they're going to be like involved in the signal path and they're not as critical. But I want to put these nice resistors that are in, especially all these ones that are in the signal path, on the actual preamp board, to try to make sure we can eliminate as much hiss as possible. Because I do believe cheap resistors, especially in the signal path or when there's a lot of current going through them, they generate hiss. And that is not something that we want, especially in a preamp where you're taking a very low signal and there's a lot of amplification going on. There's a lot of opportunity for bad things to get amplified as well as the good stuff. So that's those two 68K resistors. I'm kind of starting with the larger resistors or the higher wattage resistors first, and then working my way down to the lower wattage ones. Okay, the next thing we're probably going to do is do these 3-watt resistors that are along the edge. And I just had those right here. So let's start with the 2K ones. We'll start on this end of the board and work our way down. So we got these two guys here. These are supposed to be 2K. Let's check them out and see what they are. Yep, it's 2K. That's 2K. And this is this capacitor and these resistor. Each one of these resistors has a 22 UF capacitor on the other side of it to ground. And what that creates is like a decoupling RC network that decouples the plate of each stage from the plate of the stage ahead of it, so that you don't end up with feedback and motor boating or weird stuff happening with the signal. So here's this one. And again, we're going to standing off from the board a little bit. I hope that's in focus or enough to see. Yeah, it is. We want it about like that. Maybe not quite that high. About like that. Although, like I said, it's not going to hurt anything to have them stand up a little bit higher than I normally would, because this got inches before it gets near the other side. And then what I'm probably going to do on these guys is populate all of these slots along the edges, and then come back and solder them all in one pass. You can do it however you want. If you want to do some of it, you want to do them one at a time so you don't get confused. I feel like once they're in position, they're not going anywhere. I don't think there's any really way to get confused. I personally don't like just putting everything in and populating it all up. I feel like I get a little more, I don't know. Again, kind of mixing up, fitting the parts and soldering makes it a little less tedious to me. So these are supposed to be 20K. Again, that's super close to 20K. Yeah, I really like these Vichy resistors. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. I'm not good at pronouncing stuff. Vishay. Anyway, I've had really good luck with these resistors being, even the 5% parts seem to be just like almost right on the money. And their metal film resistors are nice and quiet. And I'm hoping that using these really nice resistors, maybe that's where some of the hiss that I got out of the other preamp was coming from, was the, made in China resistors that who knows what they are. After seeing that fake ERO capacitor in that other amp, it makes me question anything that comes out in these China kits or in these made in China amplifiers. Okay, this last one, these are supposed to be 200K, and then we'll solder all these guys in. And again, there's absolutely no reason to get in a hurry. It's 204K. And again, when you got a 5% part, sometimes they are a little different from one to the next. That one's 199. Now, if I was really being anal about building this thing, I would have bought like 10 of each part and tried to match the resistors super close. But I'm not too worried about this. I think this will be fine. And this is the last spot for the power rail going across each side. It feeds the plates of each of these tubes. And maybe if I was building this point to point and was like really trying to get the last % of perfection, I'd be worried about that. But I'm not today. We're getting this thing built. Now see how it's got a little black messy stuff on there? Let me see if I can zoom this in for you. See that tip's getting like some black kind of goopy stuff on there? And then after you run it through the little thing, it's gone. Or most of it is. And then we come back and put some fresh solder on it. Wipe it on the little sponge. And then the tip looked brand new again. And that's what you want it to look like before you start soldering joints up. So while your iron's sitting there, just kind of baking in the stand, while you're bending up leads and checking parts, before you get to soldering the next joints up, make sure you clean the tip up. It just makes a huge difference in what it's like soldering these things and the ease of it. Then we're going to come back and heat up both sides of that one. Because that little wiggle action as it's cooling off just isn't exactly what you want to see happening while you're soldering up components onto a board. But we can take care of that. I just noticed that possibly the board was off the edge of the camera when I did this resistor over here, but it really is hard to work and concentrate on what I'm doing. At the same time, make sure the camera's recording and I'm getting everything that I need in the frame. Okay, so now we're going to come back and snip these leads. And I'm probably going to split this up into a couple of videos, because I know I'm not in a hurry, and I want to make sure that this is done just right. I'm not having to go back. But you can see how the resistors are standing up proud of the board. That's going to help keep the heat, give it some air circulation around that resistor so it'll stay cool. Let me see if I can zoom in here and you can see that. Just like that. That's what you want to do. Okay. So I think that's going to be it for this video. Hope you're enjoying my channel. If you are, please subscribe, like the video, and we'll see you in the next part of this video while we continue to populate this board up with the components.